Hey, folks, this is Waylon of Elephant Journal, and I'm here to talk about my least favorite subject, or second least favorite subject in the entire world, which is Lyme disease, which terrifies the bejesus out of me. And we'll get into why it's actually a somewhat rational fear to have. Hey, Kayla.
Hey.
Hey, sorry if I'm yelling. So, Lyme disease, you have posted about it a few times in like one of our local Boulder like community boards. And I found the post really helpful. I feel like you did it a year ago or some other time, and I've interacted both times. My personal story, just so we get me out of the way, is I've never had it, thankfully. Colorado has relatively low Lyme disease with ticks historically. Um, but Vermont, where I went to high school, was a verdant, heavenly, bucolic, just nature and forests. And I ran around there as a high school kid. I went back there a few years ago to Karmashuling Buddhist Center there. And I ran through some meadows and everyone freaked out. They were like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And they said, "You can't run through fields with grass and all that." And I was like, "Are you kidding me?" Like, the whole point of Vermont is nature. I mean, it's so stunningly beautiful. So I feel like that's sort of been taken away from us, not just in Vermont, but along the world. And I've had a girlfriend, an ex with Lyme disease. I've had a bunch of friends with Lyme who have done conventional treatment and total alternative and been relatively defeated by it in all cases. I've had my ex actually did kind of heal from it, but it was an ongoing thing. So that's my terror, just so you know why I'm so interested in it, because I feel like you can't sit, we were in Burlington a year ago or whatever with my girlfriend at the time, and we were like, we can't go sit on the grass.
Yeah.
So is that crazy talk or is that sort of relatively founded?
I mean, in some instances, it's relatively founded, especially this time of year that we're in right now with spring.
Yeah,
Um, I'm just going to jump right into it. But
please.
yeah, so with this time of year, with spring happening, what ticks are doing is something called questing. And so they've, been in a long period of winter, just like us humans have. And blood is their food source. And so they can withstand many months without a food source. But once spring comes around, that is like where their window becomes like they've got to get food, aka blood, as soon as possible. Otherwise, they're not going to survive. So, in springtime when everything is waking up, so are the ticks. They're coming out of their dormancy. There's multiple things happening. This time of year, the questing is happening. So they're putting themselves in spaces and places where they can get a vector to get blood from, whether that's animal, human, what have you. And then the second piece of that is climate change is making a huge impact on the tick population and therein the prevalence of tick-borne illnesses. So I want to kind of break that down a little bit because,
Can I add one reason I'm so terrified of it?
yeah,
So I'm like the dumb human interest part of this conversation. So I was like, okay, you can't be in nature at all, like meadows and all this. Like literally the farmer, the gardener, the lead gardener, he's like a famous gardener, generations of gardeners, has this huge, beautiful organic farm. He was like, you can walk from here to the entrance of the garden, like 100 feet, and you'll have often like 10 ticks on your legs.
yeah,
But my terror expanded when I learned that ticks can ride your dogs. They can ride the mice into your homes. So it's not even like you can have a tick proof area around your house, which is part is a good idea, but they can still come in on
yeah,
your dogs, on obviously on yourself, your children, whatever.
right, right, exactly.
Oh,
And yeah, so it is something that we really do need to be aware of. There are many different ways that we can interact with a tick, like you're saying. And certain parts of the country are way more prevalent than, other parts. Like here in Colorado, yes, we still have ticks. We have about 30 different species of ticks here in Colorado alone. And to go back to what I was talking on a little bit ago about the tick-borne illness,
Thank
so a
you.
lot of us, yeah, a lot of us know Lyme disease, right? And we think of ticks and Lyme. And Lyme is only one part of the equation. There are upwards of 15 plus what they call co-infections, meaning that one tick can be carrying up to 15 different infectious diseases at one point in time. So that's where the umbrella term should more be tick-borne illness versus Lyme disease. Because Lyme is just one of many things that a tick can be carrying. That's important to know.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I know we've always had like Rocky Mountain tick fever. Is that what it's called?
Yeah, Rocky Mountain spotted fever, relapsing, there's relapsing fever.
When I was a little kid up at now Drawla Mountain Center, Shambhala Mountain Center, I remember getting ticks all the time. And there wasn't that terror at the time. It was more like, oh, you have a tick. We have to get it out the right way.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll get into some of that. But Lyme does feel uniquely scary. Just knowing friends of mine, like a lady who was in great shape. She was older. She was my mom's age at the time, probably like late 60s, but very active and great shape all her life. And I remember walking with her and her husband and my mom on a beach for like 20 minutes. And then I heard later she was wrecked, like energy wise, for the entire rest of the week, if not
Yeah,
more. Is that real? I mean, that's
it is.
real. Yeah.
Yeah. So a couple things to break down there is it really depends on the person. So each person we have, to go into the genetics part of it, you can be genetically really predisposed to getting Lyme, meaning you don't have any natural antibodies to fight against Lyme. I happen to be one of those people. So when I got bit, I most likely, from what I gather, I got bit in 2013 in upstate New York. I was traveling up there in a cabin in a lake in the middle of nowhere on an island. And I didn't see a tick. I didn't see a tick bite or the bullseye rash that sometimes is talked about. But I instantaneously got sick overnight and my life completely changed in an instant.
And just to guess, I mean, you being a Boulder type person, Boulder, Colorado, where we live, I'm sure you were very active at that time and healthy. And
Yeah, I was actually at that time, I was training for my first mountain half marathon, trail running half marathon. And I was in great shape. Let's see, that was it was a decade ago. So I was 31 years old and about to be 42 this year. And it took me out. Everything from there were moments where I was unable to walk. I couldn't hold a glass of water in my hands to give myself water. I couldn't name an apple in the grocery store. I would be in a store and then all of a sudden be like, I don't know where I am or what I'm doing here.
it wasn't just your energy or your ability to even drink a glass of water and take care of yourself, which is seriously serious, but it
Right.
was like mental.
Yeah. And that's part of the thing with Lyme. It is not just the energy and the fatigue that you hear often is the common symptom, which it is, but it's just one of many. Lyme truly affects every organ and part of your body. And there's something called neurological Lyme disease. So if Lyme stays in the body, if you get bit and it goes untreated for, you know, there's a very short window of time. There's about like 5 to 7 days where you can get on antibiotics and most likely be okay. Anything longer than a week, you're going into already chronic late stage Lyme. And
So
the
I know that
longer,
you explain all of this all the time. So I apologize for asking like obvious
complete.
questions. But if you don't get the bullseye rash, how do you know you might have been bitten?
Yeah. So this is where it gets really tricky. And this is where prevention is the biggest piece of this whole
Right.
journey.
So
So
for I have socks here. So I hear socks and tucked your pants tucked into them.
Yep. Yep. Pants tucked into your socks, wearing colored clothing. Um,
I never
there-
heard that. Why they don't like the light?
because then you can see them on your, like if they're crawling, yeah, if they're crawling up your pants or your socks or whatever, you're able to see that you have a tick on you.
I thought it was like a fashion thing, like ticks don't like, they
Right. They
don't
don't
like
like the
light.
color white. Yeah. Yeah.
Someone in the comments, and I encourage all the comments and questions anyone wants to ask, said, you may have seen it too. You don't always see them. They can be as small as a period at the end of a sentence.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. So they vary in size, and the larva, the babies, the size of a poppy seed. So you could think it's just a freckle or a speck of dirt on you, and you're not seeing it, right?
I'm like covered in freckles. I mean, look at me.
Yes. Yeah. And especially this time of year, going back to the beginning of the conversation, talking about questing and what they're doing, the ticks in their cycle right now, they're really looking for those vectors. So this is why it's super important to wear tick repellent. There's everything from the natural side of tick repellent all the way up to DEET. And quite frankly, like I'm a natural holistic person. That's what I do for a living. That's what, my lifestyle, all of that.
Yeah.
But honestly,
I know what you're going to say.
yeah, if I were to go to the East Coast or
Yeah.
anywhere outside of the Southwest in the United States, I would be wearing DEET. And it's even here. There are certain trails and areas that are heavily wooded and tall grasses and things. I'll be wearing DEET, and I always am doing tick checks.
So if you and me and a whole bunch of our friends were invited to like a picnic at Ebonji Fine, right? That's a big park near us right now. Would you just be like, no, thank you?
I would think about it.
Yeah.
It would take me a little bit, to be honest, to think about and say yes or no. I would be the person for sure to bring, and I do this time of year, like spraying my blanket that I'm sitting on and making sure I'm wearing tick repellent, and then doing a tick check after I eat.
And do you feel like you're obviously safer if you're on a big blanket,
Yeah.
but they could crawl over, right?
Yeah.
So you're not like safe if you're on a blanket.
Yeah, not necessarily. I mean, you want to be checking it out, just making sure, especially here in the grass. And
Right.
so the ticks really like to be in or near dark, moist areas. So if you're by a creek, heavily wooded area, someplace that's been wet or moist recently, that's where they're going to be the most, But if we're like sitting on rocks or out, where the grass isn't so thick, it's more gravelly, rocky, then yeah, like that's going to be a way safer place to be not exposing yourself to ticks, possibly.
And if, I remember being in Kripalu, which you may know of in Western Mass, and I went for a jog and, there's like trees above you, all that. When I got back, I was like neurotically terrified, or maybe like rationally terrified.
Yeah.
And I like asked all these people who I barely knew to like check the inside of my knees and stuff.
Yeah, because what they're looking for is body heat. Like they don't see, oh, it's a human. They sense body heat. So they're going towards heat surfaces. So a couple of things here to note. Like you can also use a product called permethrin, which is a spray. And you don't want to put this on your body. This is not something you put on your body, but it is something you put on your clothes. So you could spray your hat with permethrin, your regular hiking or outdoor shoes, socks, and
Why not on your body? Because it's too intense.
right. It's a fairly toxic thing that you don't want on your skin. Cardin is another tick repellent that you can put on your skin. So there's the DEET, there's the picaridin, and then lemongrass essential oil and geranium essential oil. Those two are the most potent essential oils against repelling ticks.
Wait, can you say that again? Because essential oils would be way less toxic, right?
Right. Yeah. So lemongrass and geranium are the two potent tick repellent essential oils. And there's a lot of repellent that's coming out now. I believe Repel and Murphy's are two brands that make lemongrass um, tick repellent. So it's already out there. You can buy it. Even REI sells it, all of those places. So
Go help
recommend.
us. I love
Yeah.
this.
Yeah, recommend getting the permethrin for your regular, hiking clothes. It'll stay on the clothes, the permethrin, up to 10 washes.
Okay.
So, something good to know there. Wearing your tick repellent. And then, if you're in a heavily wooded area, East Coast, Midwest, the Southern states, and Pacific Northwest, you can take your clothes off after hiking and put them in the dryer at high heat for 20 to 30 minutes to kill off anything you may have picked up. So,
Why did you specify like you can't do that anywhere?
well, you can do that anywhere, but those are like the high
I
risk
see.
areas. Yeah, where ticks are more, higher density of disease pathogen carrying ticks are in those areas in particular.
I
So,
hate this. Can you talk about how to heal from it, like your path?
yeah. Yeah. So, my path with it, I was very fortunate at the time. I had just started holistic nutrition school when I got sick. And so honestly, my diet and everything I was learning in my holistic schooling at the time truly, I think, set me up for getting through this. And diet does play an insurmountable effect on healing from chronic illness and Lyme disease in general. Because there is so much inflammation happening in the body through the disease process with the pathogen that really needing to give yourself as much metabolic space as possible to move through it.
I know we've already touched on it, but how are you doing now, 10 years later?
Great. Yeah, I consider myself fully healed. Yeah, feel very blessed, very happy about that. And it was a tough road. It took me 8 years and in the beginning, it was working in a combination of Western medicine meets Eastern medicine, meaning I was taking antibiotics, anti-malarials, antifungals, on top of taking herbs and homeopathics and all of that. And then there became a turning point for me where, I could talk about this for a long time and this is very nuanced, but I'll share from my experience and what I've witnessed in the community is, oftentimes people using Western medicine to heal from Lyme will go into remission for a couple of years. I should backtrack and say people healing from chronic late stage Lyme and neurological Lyme.
Okay. Which means you're specifying like
The serious long term, not a recent bite. You didn't catch it in time because all this,
right,
all of that.
the bad.
Right. And a lot of people that I've seen on the journey, and myself included, would have remission or times that were good for a number of years and then get set back again and have to go through the whole cycle again. So for me in my journey, I knew that this was possible. I didn't want to live with a life of what ifs and not having stability in my system and body. And so I went to a very holistic treatment that ended up being what brought me to the place I am now. And that is called bee venom therapy.
Oh,
And yeah, and so that's it's quite a commitment. But for me, I knew that that commitment from what I was seeing in the community and with the research and all of that would give me the greatest possibility of getting my life back. And, that was a 4-year long journey. And I'm glad that I did it because I do, in fact, have my life back. And I feel like in a lot of ways, I have more of my life back than I did prior to Lyme. And I know it's kind of like an interesting
like
little,
you've come through this hero's journey, Joseph Campbell, and you're like, you've been through some tough stuff, like any trauma or any hard times.
yeah. Yeah. And in that process, I don't want to sugarcoat, there's nothing to sugarcoat in this process. It is grueling. I do not cheat on anyone. A lot of medical doctors be like, this is one of the hardest, most difficult processes in the body that you can go through. And at the same time, like, I feel so fortified in my system and in my knowing, um, now, because I had to go back and deconstruct so many parts of me and look at them, because this illness with Lyme literally takes every single thing away from you, you know? And to sit in the bottom of that barrel and then learn how to rebuild your life again and find modalities and the ways to do that, you know, yeah, it sucks and it's awful. And at the same time, like, I feel so grateful I feel proud of who I am and
Yeah.
who I've
Yeah.
become
Yeah.
through that process, you know?
Yeah. Good for you.
And, like,
Moments where you're like, I mean, I just feel like, I think the reason I'm so terrified about it is, I'm very like forward looking in life. I have a lot of energy. I'm very active. I work really hard. I'm really super concerned about climate change and, you know, equity and various issues, democracy. Um, I run a company and I'm always like, I don't like, I think nothing would get under my motivation and undermine my entire like will to live more than not being able to do that,
yeah,
live my mission. And I think Lyme, having seen these really good friends of mine, and struggle with it, I was like, I would fall into depression, which would only compound the problem.
yeah. Yeah, and that's, an important piece to talk about here, because there's a couple of different angles of depression that happen with Lyme. Is both the neurological Lyme itself and then inflammatory process of the brain getting inflamed does cause those depressive feelings and thoughts. And second to that, your life is taken away from you, and that is depressing. And it does challenge your will to live. I had many moments there where I was questioning whether or not I wanted to be here any longer. And, those are the parts that really need to get talked about with this particular illness, because there are so many people. One of the major causes of death with Lyme disease is suicide. And yes,
Wow.
yes.
I never read that. Wow.
Yeah. And
But
it's
it's surprising.
yeah,
Given,
the combination,
yeah.
like I said, like, and the invisibility in it. Most doctors aren't believing you, your family, your friends, your community aren't believing you. On the outside, you look like a normal human being. On the inside, you're hollow and can't function, can't think, can't, feel, and you're also in excruciating pain, and your skin is on fire, vision, the whole thing. There is so much that happens inside that no one is seeing. And then the medical community and friends and family are dismissing because you look normal. And that's not it. This invisible illness is very real. And the effects that happen um, on a person going through that is insurmountable. And
It
it's
must be much better though now, because I feel like 10 years ago, I remember seeing the first article on Lyme disease on Elephant Journal. I don't remember when it was, but it was probably more than 10 years ago.
yeah.
But now it's like, it's a huge thing and there must be more funding and awareness. I know I've read that there was a vaccine that had been developed like, I don't remember, 15 years ago or something, but then it wasn't brought to market. I don't know if that's totally true, but
It,
is there more funding or vaccines or kind of science hope? Because if it has become such a huge problem, it must be super profitable to solve it or treat it.
so that's an interesting thing that you just brought up, and I'll take us down a little bit of a rabbit hole there. Is, unfortunately, no. A lot of the awareness and everything that is being brought out is through grassroots, through people who have experienced Lyme, speaking out and sharing with, communities, family, and friends, like we're doing here. And as far as funding goes, no, the funding is terrible for Lyme and Lyme disease awareness. And in fact,
Hmm.
Lyme disease itself is invisible pandemic, epidemic that is happening across the globe, and no one is talking about it. And there are a number of reasons why. First, there are sectors of like the wildlife, like DNR, Division of Wildlife Management, that monitor tick populations. And they are going out and gathering ticks and figuring out how much of the population is diseased, what types of ticks are where and what have you. And that is not a funded thing that's happening in every state across the United States or in other countries as well. So we're not getting accurate information as to how many diseased ticks are out and the population itself. And then that comes and breaks us into what's happening in the medical community. There is not a silver bullet into treating Lyme. So talking about, the shadowy rabbit parts of this is like the pharmaceutical companies can't make money off of it because there isn't a like direct feed line into this is how you treat Lyme disease. It is not straightforward and simple like that.
I'm not a big pharma stan is anyone.
Yeah.
But I do, respect scientists individually and as a community, and appreciate their work. And I think, so many people have Lyme disease now. Like they must already treat so many things that are complicated. They're not just a silver bullet. Like, how can they not, just from a mercenary point of view, be like, there's money to be made here if we can even help? Like with HIV, things came out for years that didn't cure it,
Right.
but they make it manageable.
Right. Yeah, that's the golden question right there. I don't have the answer. I don't understand why they're not doing that.
Darn it.
Yeah. I mean,
I honestly thought that yes, like so many people have it.
yeah.
There's like treatments coming around the mountain.
Yeah. And that's the tricky part, like if you catch that you got a tick bite right away or whatever, then, yes, they will prescribe the antibiotic to clear the infection. But if it's a late stage thing, doctors are chasing symptoms because the symptoms are literally, 50 to 60 symptoms long to 100. And so a lot of people are getting misdiagnosed with MS and Alzheimer's and ALS and rheumatoid arthritis and, all of these other diseases, when in fact, a lot of the time they're finding the root cause of that is actually Lyme disease. And this again goes into the catch-22 of testing. The testing that is out there for Lyme right now is not reliable. And again, it goes back to the earlier conversation we were talking about on how Lyme hides in the system stuff. So it is not easily detected because it hides in something called biofilm in the body. So it is undetectable unless it's in its replication cycle where it's out and moving in the body. So it's very difficult to get a proper diagnosis through testing. And in the United States, that testing is not covered by insurance. The most accurate test for Lyme disease right now is anywhere between $600 to $1,000 for that test that is not covered by insurance. And most doctors are not telling their patients to go get tested for Lyme disease until it's, a year or two later and they can't figure out what's going on. And it's like a last resort thing.
Right.
So there are so many problems and issues inside of Lyme disease as a whole, from climate change, global warming, to testing, to the whole gamut.
So there's so much here. I appreciate your covering. So many different like directions or rabbit holes you can go in. Someone just had a good comment here. Did you see that one? Is Lyme viral or bacterial or both? With stuff like Valtrex or Paxlovid help? Also, dogs and cats get Lyme vaccines, right? Could there potentially be one for humans? We were kind of touching on the vaccine, but we didn't quite.
Yeah. So Lyme is a bacteria.
And
Uh,
they just clarified their comment there if you were
okay.
there. Yeah.
Yeah, Lyme is a bacteria. It's a relative of syphilis. So the bacteria itself is like a corkscrew. So it corkscrews itself into the cells, our bones, tissues, joints, all of that. So it's really hard for medicine to get into those areas and kill off the bacteria.
So, and then the vaccine thing, the cat, dogs.
Yeah, so I think they found a pretty good way to do that inside of animals or pets. But as far as human goes, no, they have not. There have been quite a number of adverse reactions coming from these Lyme vaccines.
Mm,
Um,
okay, not yet.